Joined now by Justin Hopkins of ScoopDuck, taking a well-deserved respite following spring practice. He's in Palm Springs. Man, I gotta go to Palm Springs. This is beautiful. But J-Hop, you know what else was beautiful? Watching Dillon Gabriel operate Oregon's offense. And I want you to tell me if I'm crazy or if I'm connecting too many dots here. Dillon Gabriel's on his third school, but it kind of feels like he's always either been at Oregon or supposed to have been at Oregon. And here's why. It's a really circuitous path in my brain, and you can tell me how nuts I am. So Scott Frost used to be Oregon's offensive coordinator. When he was OC, Mackenzie Milton came to camp. He wanted to sign Mackenzie Milton. They're like, no, we have to sign this guy from Eugene, Justin Herbert, because he's local. And so they signed Justin Herbert, and I guess that worked out okay. But Mackenzie Milton ends up playing for Scott Frost at UCF. Frost leaves. Mackenzie Milton then tells Josh Heupel at UCF, hey, there's this dude at my high school. You should recruit him. It's Dillon Gabriel. And it's like, neither Mackenzie Milton nor Dillon Gabriel had played for Oregon, but always felt like they should have been Oregon quarterbacks.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. It's a great story. It's kind of, it's just really synonymous. You think of Hawaiian quarterbacks, you think of Oregon, and of course it started with Marcus Mariota, but Mazzoli had a lot of ties there, and just it feels like the right thing. And I don't know if this is Wilstein or Dan Lanning or what it is, but they certainly know how to make quarterbacks feel comfortable at Oregon. And they did a tremendous job with Bo Nix. Obviously, his transition from Auburn to Oregon, we know what that story played out like, and already it looks like Gabriel is very comfortable within that offense and looks like he's certainly happy to be in Eugene.
Yeah, and he's played a ton of football, obviously, at UCF and Oklahoma, but he was playing in the same offense, essentially, at both those places. This is a different offense than the one he's played in, but he looked super comfortable. The ball got out so fast, which, as we saw with Bo Nix, is critical in what Oregon wants to do. That was the part that I was, I guess, not shocked because he's played so much, but that it looked that comfortable and that easy for him right off the bat.
Yeah, and I know we got a pretty vanilla offense there, and, they kept things in check, but still, you wanted to see, for me, I think Oregon fans are tremendously spoiled because we were watching Bo Nix, and he made very few mistakes, if any, in any game or at any time. So you go kind of expecting that level of perfection, which is not common. And was Dillon Gabriel perfect? No, he wasn't perfect, but he kept a pretty high level. The completion rate was good. He looked comfortable. He knew where his receivers were supposed to be. It looked like more of the same in a different quarterback.
We saw this with Bo Nix getting drafted by the Broncos, and Sean Payton pointed out how accurate Bo Nix was in this offense. And obviously, look, the criticism of that is that the depth of target is not super deep in this offense, but I'm not particularly worried about necessarily how that translates to the NFL. I'm worried about how it gains yards for Oregon right now. And I'm guessing that Dillon Gabriel is going to be one of the national leaders in completion percentage this year, just because he's playing in an offense. He was 69% completion percentage last year. He's playing in an offense where Bo Nix was in the high 70s.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if we're going to go off the track record of Bo Nix from the last two seasons and what Will Stein likes to do with his offense, you've got to think that that's going to be a great thing for Gabriel's completion percentage. And one of the cool things that he kind of brings to the table that he might be a little bit more, tailor-made for than Bo Nix was the fact that he throws a really tremendous deep ball. He's got really nice touch on that deep ball. He's got an absolute bevy of wide receivers to choose from. So you've got to think, hopefully Gabriel knows, when to take his chances and when to take what's there and keep it in front of him. And if he does that, his completion percentage could, it's going to be in the 60s at the very least, I would think. And like you said, if he's gaining 5 yards every time he throws the ball, that's a pretty good thing for the Oregon offense.
And we saw a couple hookups with Tez Johnson, who strikes me as someone who could be that kind of deep threat. But who else in this receiving core do you think can take advantage of how well Gabriel throws the deep ball?
All spring, I've heard a lot about Evan Stewart. That's probably no surprise to anybody that's been paying attention. I've heard that he's kind of been a nightmare, if you will, to guard one-on-one. I've heard a lot of great things about Trayshawn Holden stepping up and being more of a leader in that room and being more vocal and kind of taking that next step as well. So those are your first three, but then you're still talking about Gary Bryant Jr., who contributed last year. We saw Kyler Casper make some big plays in the spring game as well. We saw Justice Lowe, who's basically been untalked about, make a couple tremendous plays in the spring game so far. So I know I'm going to sound like the homer, but you could put that wide receiver room up at Oregon up against anybody in the country, and if it's not the best, it's up there for sure.
Yeah. Now, one thing, as we watched the draft, obviously Jackson Powers Johnson was a name we heard a lot about. He winds up going in the second round of the Raiders. How do they replace him? Because he was so valuable to Oregon over the last couple of years.
Yeah, luckily for Oregon, that's the only spot on the offensive line you have to fill this year, which is a really tough spot to fill. And you're obviously taking away the nation's best in Jackson Powers Johnson, but they've got Pancho Lalulu out there from Hawaii, which we were talking about a little bit ago. Yep. And I don't recall really any bad snaps. There was one yesterday where there was a miscommunication of when the snap was supposed to go and when it happened. But otherwise, the snap yesterday, for the most part, was in the hands of the quarterback every time, which is what you want. So right now, it's looking like they're in pretty good shape there. But again, when you're going from one of the nation's best, those are some really big shoes to fill.
Yeah, Poncho is nasty. That's gonna be something. So 8 guys drafted, and Dan Lanning points out, he's like, hey, this is wonderful. He says, want more in the first and second round. Obviously, that was just Bo Nix and Jackson Powers Johnson, but then you saw Troy Franklin and Brandon Dorlus and all those guys come off the board too. But that's a lot of really good players that do have to be replaced, especially like Dorlus on that defensive line. How are those younger guys going to replace that group?
Yeah, I mean, I would say specifically in the case of Dorlus, you're thankful that Jordan Birch came back for another year because that's a nice fill in there. That's the key. That was probably one of the biggest things I wanted to see in the spring game was that defensive line and some of the young guys pulling up. I think the interior of the defensive line is really where Oregon is wanting to make sure that they're ready. I don't think they're concerned per se, but I think they just want to be solid there. We saw some big plays from Michael Gardner on Saturday, a young guy coming up. Amari Washington's another guy that's been playing a lot of snaps there. I've heard, Ungalele again this year has taken another step forward. Mateo, DJ's younger brother. Yeah, so you're going to watch for him as well. So Dan Lanning has recruited the defensive line, I think, by position in numbers there more than anywhere in the last 2 years, and that's really going to show this year. They did lose Johnny Bowens to the transfer portal, and in years past, that would have almost been a crippling move, where now it just kind of feels like there was an abundance of guys, and they're kind of weeding each other out, if you will, a little bit. Yeah, it's a weird dynamic, and I think Oregon's one of those schools where I don't really recall Oregon losing anybody they've ever wanted to, not wanted to lose in the transfer portal. Like they seem to be in that group that if they're active in the transfer portal, it's to get something they want. And if somebody's leaving, it's because it's a playing time issue. Yeah, I feel like, at least from the sources, there's 2 guys that have left the program in the last 3 years that Oregon would have liked to keep. And if you look at the numbers, that's a really good percentage. That's a great hit rate. But DJ James going to Auburn, had a great career down there, was a great player. Maliki Mataval went to UCLA a couple seasons ago and had a kind of mixed results there. Those were 2 guys, but otherwise, yeah, you're looking at Oregon. They do such a tremendous job of retention, and I feel like a broken record. But Oregon is so well put together on the NIL front from a team perspective. That's what a lot of people ignore. I mean, you think of NIL and you think of recruiting and getting players on campus. Yeah, that's part of it, and you got to be well funded and organized there. But Oregon's so organized, at least from an NIL standpoint, of the existing players on the team. They rarely, if ever, lose anybody that they truly want to keep. The Oregon football schedule, how exciting that is. First season in the Big Ten. They got Ohio State coming to Eugene in October. Do you want tickets to that game? You can get them on Game Time. Download that Game Time app. Type in Oregon football. You find the Ohio State game. It'll show you exactly where in Autzen Stadium you could sit for that game. Couple more taps. That ticket is yours. Same. If you're a Nebraska fan, super pumped about Dylan Raiola. And look, yeah, I know Memorial Stadium is sold out for 100 billion consecutive games, but you can still get tickets to that Colorado game. You can see Coach Prime against Nebraska, against Dylan Raiola, probably Dylan Raiola, we think, at Memorial Stadium with the Game Time app. So download that.
use the code Staples. You get $20 off your first purchase. And it doesn't have to be a football game. Could be a concert, could be a comedy show. They got tickets to everything at Game Time, and it's so easy to use. You can see exactly where you'll sit. You can do that all in price. You know exactly what you're paying. It's so easy. Download the Game Time app. Use the code Staples. $20 off your first purchase, and get yourself some tickets. Yeah, and that's the key. That's how you keep it rolling. And like you mentioned, Jordan Birch coming back. He was a transfer from South Carolina, former 5-star recruit. I don't know that we've seen him reach his potential yet. I think that's something that people at South Carolina and people at Oregon have been wanting to see, but perhaps this is the year for that. And I got to ask you, J-Hop, like, as they move into the Big Ten, how comfortable are you with where this roster is in terms of the other? I feel like we have to lump them in with the contenders for the Big Ten title. So how do you feel about this roster versus, say, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, that group?
Yeah, all really good rosters, right? And so there's two things that go with that. Obviously, you've got to be good in the trenches. We know that. That's what the Big does. You've got to have depth, first and foremost. We know that. Injuries are going to happen. Guys are going to be nicked up. They might miss a game. They might miss 2 or 3 games. You've got to have depth. And there's really not a position group on this roster where I don't see Oregon, pretty well set 3 to 4 deep, which is exactly what you want, along with being good in the trenches. But I think I'm looking at the best pure roster I've seen at Oregon. They've got skill at almost all the positions, and they have depth. And so I think just if you're looking 1 through 85, this is probably the best Oregon team I've seen in a long time, 1 through 85. They've got young guys coming up. Aaron Flowers, maybe we'll talk about him, but Dakota Fields, some guys that stepped up that are really young yesterday. And then you brought in some transfers that are looking like, hey, Kobe Savage is going to be a dude. Jay Harris looked like he was yoked up and ready to run over a freight train yesterday as a running back. So, yeah, they're set up. And, I think you and I could probably both agree. You look at Ohio State and you look at Oregon, and those are 2 really good football teams that are probably going to meet undefeated later on.
Well, and it's interesting because I'm thinking when you say that, you feel like it's the best put together Oregon roster you've seen in a long time. I'm thinking back to the last time Oregon played for the national title, which is the 2014 season. Mariota wins the Heisman Trophy that year, and they get to the national title game and play against Ohio State, which was by far the most talented team that year, was just loaded with potential first rounders, and it didn't go so well. How different would you say this roster is from that roster? Because that was a really good roster. Like, that's got Mariota, obviously, DeForest Buckner. Like, there's some real dudes on that roster. But how different is this roster from maybe that one?
Yeah, it's really unique, and it's hard for me to say. I think that this roster today is more like the 2012 Oregon team, which was probably a better, 1 through, 30 team, that 2012 team, than the 2014. That 2014 team was heavily propped up by Marcus Mariota being absolutely phenomenal that year in a great offense that was tailor-made for him. And you had some really good players like DeForest Buckner. But I think that 1 through 22 was nowhere close to what the 2012 team was, and nowhere close to where this team is today. This team in the trenches is so much bigger and so much stronger, and they can go 2 deep at any position and not have a huge drop-off, which is exactly what, we both know needs to happen for the Big.
You mentioned some of the young guys, Fields and Flowers. What about those guys stood out in the spring?
Yeah, I think you just saw them making plays and looking comfortable. And here's what is most impressive about those young guys. They're going against really good wide receivers. It's not like these guys were picking on walk-ons or guys you've never heard of. These are, really good young players going up against experienced, skilled wide receivers. And again, you're going up against quite possibly one of the best quarterback rooms in the country. Oregon had 4 guys out there that were spraying the football all over the place and making some huge plays. So, I think Aaron Flowers, and I'll touch on him, he's the guy that it feels like Oregon's been craving. Like, of course, they love quarterback play and all this other stuff, but, Oregon had Javon Holland a few years ago who absolutely spoiled us at safety. He was so good and just did so many things well. And the safety play at Oregon since Dan Lanning has arrived, which wasn't all his fault, has been hit or miss. Okay. It's kind of been one of the weaker groups at Oregon. So now you bring in, Tysheem Johnson returns and you bring in Kobe Savage as a starter from Kansas State. And then you couple that with a young guy like Aaron Flowers that, yesterday looked like he's definitely got the makings of being a very good safety in this league for a long time. It looks like that safety room might be back. And that's, again, that's been the weakest link. And I think if Oregon is strong at safety this year, I believe that the rest of the position groups are better than safety for Oregon. That means they're going to be a pretty good football team. And just to boot, just so I don't forget, Oregon did make a really long field goal yesterday in the spring game, and I'm pretty sure that draw the biggest cheers of the day when Oregon made a field goal.
I watched the replay of that, and I was like, is this a Bronx cheer? What's going on here? But that was a nice kick.
It was a good kick, and it was very refreshing for Oregon fans.
So another person we got to see, which felt like it's been a while in coming, was Dante Moore playing quarterback at Oregon, because Dante was obviously committed to Oregon, flipped to UCLA, played for UCLA last year. Now he's at Oregon. And it was interesting because one of the things that was unique about that transfer portal recruitment is Dante Moore seemed interested in going to a place where he would sit and develop a little bit, which you don't see every day. And I felt like you could see why, because you go from seeing Dillon Gabriel just catch the ball, there's the guy I need to throw to, boom, it's out. And Dante Moore, there's a little more hesitation there. And I thought, okay, he seemed to have a good pulse on himself, realizing he didn't need to go jump in and be a starter right away.
Yeah, what an amazing amount of maturity it takes to realize that, right? Especially as a quarterback, because you're constantly expecting to be the guy, be the team leader. You're, at up to this point, you've been the best player on your football team probably since you were 4 years old, and so it takes a lot of humility, I think, if you kind of look at the big picture and say, hey, look, me sitting behind an experienced guy might not be the worst thing for my long-term career. Dante Moore flashed that cannon of an arm, that we saw. I felt like if you can get Dante Moore to simply just be a little bit more consistent, which I'm sure is what he's striving for and can come over time, you've got a really good-looking quarterback there. I've heard some great things, and I've heard that a lot of practices, the difference between Gabriel and Dante Moore isn't like this. It's more like this. You know what I mean? These guys are a lot closer together. That's a pretty good problem for Dan Lanning and Will Stein to have. But do I think he takes the job away from Dillon Gabriel this year? Of course not. But if anything happens and you need Dante Moore in a pinch or whatever, you feel really good about that situation. You feel like you got a chance to continue winning that game. Again, if Dante Moore can get more comfortable within the offense, learn to, like, I think kind of what you were alluding to, maybe trust his instincts a little bit more and just get more comfortable there, that's a really good looking quarterback 1 year from now.
Yeah, because the deep ball, as you mentioned, looked great. The throws are there. He can really power the ball out to the edge too. Just got to be comfortable operating the offense. Got to be quick and decisive. And who better to learn from than a guy in Dillon Gabriel who has been quick and decisive pretty much since he showed up at UCF 5 years ago.
And the cool part is, you listen to interviews, those two talk about each other so well and with so much respect. Dante says that, Dillon has such a great feel on when it's time to be serious and when it's game time and when to just maybe crack a joke and lighten things up and keep it, friendly and fun. And he said he's had such a tremendous time learning under Gabriel and just really called him a very special mentor at times. So, if you're Dan Lanning and you're Will Stein, that's exactly what you want to hear. You want to hear QB1 and QB2 get along really well. And, you did kind of bring QB2 in to learn under QB1, and that's very much happening. So we talk about Dan Lanning so much, and you just think of all these little things that he ends up lining up. I don't know if the guy has a horseshoe or what, but he certainly seems to have a lot of these things figured out.
Well, he just has to figure it out on the field because, they've had the most talented team in the Pac-12 the previous 2 years. They didn't win a Pac-12 title either of those 2 years. So they've got to figure out how to convert that talent to titles. The degree of difficulty goes up because I think Ohio State may be the most talented team in the country, and they got to deal with them in their league now. So this is going to be so much fun, J-Hop. So I saw pretty full Autzen Stadium on Saturday, and I know culturally on the West Coast, that's not a thing like filling up the stadium for the spring game, but it seems like the people at Oregon are pretty pumped about a team going to the Big Ten.
Yeah, Oregon fans know how to fill up a stadium on Saturday, and all week long the weather report was looking a little bit dicey there. We get a little bit of that spring showers, but I mean, Oregon fans know it never rains at Austin Stadium, so got a pretty good day there. You saw the turnout was there, the energy was there. There was a Matt Kearney concert after, and the field was full of people still. The Ducks had 8 players drafted in the NFL draft on Saturday, a record for the school. So many things go in the right direction. The excitement's there. Ticket sales are through the roof. I don't know. It just looks like it's going to be a big season. And like you said, Lanning needs that. He needs those, statement wins. He needs kind of that signature win. He's got a huge opportunity early on to beat Ohio State in the season, potentially. Of course, Michigan's going to be good. Penn State. There's a lot of really good football teams that Oregon will play. But at the end of the day, you got to win that last game of the regular season. You got to beat Washington. You got to get that monkey off your back. And it certainly looks like the two programs are fairly separated in terms of talent at this point.
That's right. New league, same rivalry, but yeah, very different situation this year versus last year. J-Hop, thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.